So welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon. And good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear and see me okay and see my screen okay? Wonderful, wonderful. Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I'm actually on the East Coast. I'm in Massachusetts today, so I'm a few hours ahead of you. But I am going to be talking today about the 4 pillars of how do we create, and then more importantly, sustain a mentally healthy workplace culture. And I think it's a great topic on the heels of Dan and Sarah, because there were many times that they were referencing burnout and exhaustion and need for change with the healthcare industry. So to start, I'm going to share a little bit about my story. On that screen right there, there's 3 versions of me, and I decided to put the middle picture up there, and I'll tell you why. The version on the left, that's probably one of the worst pictures I could have found. It's my passport picture from 12 years ago. At that point, well, I couldn't smile, so I probably would have looked a little bit better if I could smile, but I was a high-performing corporate executive in that picture on the left. And it was before I decided or found the courage enough to get sober. The picture on the right is from 2019. That's me now. That's me a couple of years ago. But what's most important is that picture in the middle, that was when I was 7 years into my journey of sobriety. I was sober in that picture. However, on that day, my vice president asked all of us to take a picture to put up on our Office 365 profiles for our email. On that day, I had experienced the most intense level of suicidal thoughts I had ever experienced in my life. And I just want you to stop and just look at that picture. Can you see that I was suicidal in that picture? Most likely not. And the reason behind that is I was a master chameleon in the workplace. 25 years in corporate, either number 1, 2, or 3 in sales. Always a leader, always a mentor, always the trailblazer, always the person with a smile on my face. But throughout the majority of my corporate career, I hid behind my high performance because I lived with massive, major depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and alcohol misuse. Now, I never drank during the day. I never drank on the job, but every night, 5, 6, 7, 8 glasses of wine, followed by blackouts and hangovers the next day. I was a wife, I was a mom, a model citizen, a high-performing person in the workplace. No one had a clue that I was suffering in silence. And the reason why I suffered in silence is I was petrified, absolutely petrified, that if anyone knew my secret, that I would be judged, I would damage my professional integrity, I might lose my seat at the table, and I was just so full of shame, so I decided to stay quiet. And what I have learned throughout this entire process is that employees who live with a mental health condition, and this is from all the conversations that I've been having recently, it's very rare that they're feeling that their place of work is a place of safety where they can speak openly about their mental health. I've also learned that employees thrive when they're in a safe environment, when they feel safe, seen, heard, and understood, and they know that their leaders will not punish or judge them for speaking openly about their mental health. They thrive. Employees are afraid to ask for help for fear of judgment, retribution, or job loss. This comes up all of the time in the work that I do. Employees are still afraid of being judged. Stigma and discrimination thrive on lack of knowledge and discrimination, and we'll go through this in the presentation. But what I've learned through my work is that there is still a very high level of stigma and discrimination around mental illness and substance misuse. And then the other thing that I've learned is that leaders lead by example. And we as leaders have the power to transform the workplace culture. We have the power to recognize the impact of not addressing mental health and well-being in the workplace and making change. Just a little bit about some statistics. So 1 in 5 people will experience at least one mental health episode in their lifetime. Mental illness is more common than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease combined. That one right there really kind of blows me away all the time, because we speak freely about cancer. We speak freely about heart disease and diabetes. But do we speak openly and freely about mental health or mental illness that is trumping all three of those diseases in terms of the number of people who are living with those conditions? Depression is the most common mental health condition, and globally, mental illness is the leading cause of disability and accounts for up to 40% in some countries. These statistics, if you're thinking about the number of people who are working within your own organization, if 1 in 5 are suffering and the majority of them are afraid to speak openly, do you really know who is okay in your workforce and who is not okay? The other statistics that I wanted to share with you is that earlier in 2020, I was approached by Holly Blue and Feed Trail. Holly Blue is a nursing organization, and Feed Trail is an employee engagement and survey organization. They were doing a nurse well-being survey, and they approached me to write the mental health questions for this survey. Now, we had over 1,200 nurses respond to this survey. 75% were from acute care and long-term care facilities. And these were just some of the statistics that came up as part of this survey. And I wanted to share that. So 50% of these nurses responded that they were becoming worried at the thought of going to work. And of those 50% who responded that they were worried, 52% said their worry manifests in being distracted. 56% says they're unable to concentrate. 45% said that their worry manifested in intrusive thoughts. And then 56% feel that there is still a stigma in the workplace around mental health. Of those respondents who asked, are you personally experiencing any of the following? The top 3 responses. Now, this was 2020. It'd be great if we could do another one. 66% are experiencing anxiety, 62% emotional stress, 54% lack of sleep. This next slide, 50% of all respondents reported that they felt unsafe. Going back to the word safety on that other slide, they felt unsafe or neutral asking for mental health support in the workplace. And then 78%, that's a very, very big number. 78% of those who felt very unsafe or neutral asking for mental health support in the workplace indicated they're likely to leave their current position or specialty. Now, after listening to Dan and Sarah, we cannot let this happen. We have to be able to change the culture within organizations. Now, I do work across all industries. I work with Department of Safety. I work with early childhood centers, rescue leagues, healthcare organizations. They're all struggling with the same issues, and that's recruitment and retention. But it is critically important in healthcare that we are recruiting, not just recruiting, but retaining good talent within our organizations. Another statistic that I wanted to share with you is that 75% of medium to large organizations offer an EAP, which is an employee assistance program. The national EAP usage rate is 3 to 5%. That hits me really hard, because the majority of you on this call, I would imagine, if you're working for an organization, you probably have access to an EAP. My question is, do you know how to find it? Have your leaders talked about it? Have they dug it out of the bottom of the human resources manual and brought it to the front and said, please use this? Because the main reason why people don't use that EAP is stigma, shame, and fear. They don't know what's going to happen when they pick up that phone and call, what questions will be asked, what process they'll have to go through, how embarrassed they're going to be. But if a leader convenes a room and says, let's call the EAP program together right now. We just want to walk everyone through what the scenario looks like when you take that step and make that phone call, just to diminish the fear and the stigma. Let's go ahead and do that as a group. If we can do that as leaders, and then as leaders, really suggest or highly recommend that people engage in these services. That's what part of our roles is as leaders. So some signs and symptoms when people are living with a mental health condition, and a lot of these I think are very, they're pretty standard, but some of us may not know what all of the common signs and symptoms are. And this is not an exhaustive list, but if you yourself or you see someone within your organization withdrawing, sad, aggressive, isolated, having mood swings or poor sleep habits, if any of those things have never appeared before and now they're there, it might be cause to put your hand on that person's shoulder and say, are you okay? And are you really okay? Has their hygiene decreased? Has their nutrition changed? I know when I got sober, my entire first year of sobriety, I lived on iced coffee and ice cream. They say when you give up the alcohol, you need something to replace all that sugar that you were consuming. My nutrition was awful, but I literally was sick to my stomach for an entire year looking at food. I was not able to concentrate. Do you know anyone else around you who's having a hard time? What about decreased productivity, intrusive thoughts, increased alcohol use, worry, fear? The last one I want you to really pay attention to, and that is increased productivity. And I shared this with a CNO who I was working with a couple of weeks ago. And I said, please don't overlook your high performing nurses who that anytime you say, I need your help, they're going to be there and they're going to stand up and do a good job. Because that nurse could be doing really, really great, but that nurse could also be hiding behind that, yes, I'm here for you anytime, I'm great, and I can be everything and do anything that you want. But that's my way of hiding behind the fact that I'm really crumbling on the inside. So please don't overlook those high performance, because I personally was a chameleon in the workplace. I fooled everyone. And what I've learned is that myself, by staying silent, it was toxic for me, because I had so much shame and fear about talking about the fact that back then I called myself an alcoholic, and I no longer use that word, and I'll tell you why in this presentation. But I almost lost my own life to suicide in 2013. Had I only talked about what was going on, I could have avoided that day. That day, obviously, it was a horrible day for me. The stars aligned, and thankfully I never went through with it, but I had a plan. And it's a scary place to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about stigma. And I will say, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, one of the most effective antidotes to stigma and discrimination in the workplace is contact between peers. When I started sharing my story, so I got sober in 2009, and in 2016, I became a trainer with the National Alliance on Mental Illness New Hampshire chapter to share my own story using their format called In Our Own Voice, where I shared the bad, what happened, I shared what helped, and then I shared what's next. After becoming trained to share my story, I started stepping out on stages and going into workplaces and talking about being that high performer, that overachiever who no one would have suspected had a problem. And the more and more I shared my story, and the more and more I shared my story with corporate professionals, more and more people were stepping forward and saying, Kim, I see so many pieces of myself in your story. Thank you for taking off your mask and being brave and speaking about it. So peer support in the workplace, it is critical, because for me, I know personally, had I had peer support in the workplace, if I was open and honest about what was going on, I could have avoided a lot of the troubles that I went through. But peer support, raising our hands and saying that we're not okay, it helps to normalize that conversation about mental health and substance misuse. It assures employees that they're not alone, and it helps them feel like they're in a safe place where employees can share free of judgment. So in 2017, my vice president had acknowledged all of the work that I was doing in the area of mental health, and she knew of my sober journey. And she asked me to do a presentation at a sales meeting about mental health in the workplace and to share my story. And so I did. And I got up in front of 35 of my own coworkers, 2 vice presidents, HR, marketing, business development, you name it, they were there in the room. All of my teammates on my business development team. And I stood up in front of 35 of my own coworkers and I shared my story. And to say that you could hear a pin drop that day is an understatement. Because I was with that employer for 12 years, and that entire time, no one, not a single soul, knew that I was living with alcohol misuse, and then consequently the depression, the suicidal thoughts, and the anxiety. None of them had ever heard me describe the Kim LaMontage that I was describing, because they only knew me as the trailblazer, the coach, the leader, the out of the box thinker. But when I stood up there and I shared my truth, 8 of my own coworkers stepped forward after I spoke my truth and admitted that they too, or a family member of theirs, is living with a mental health condition. I was at a conference in Houston in 2018, 150 senior vice presidents of HR and nursing. It was a healthcare conference for talent development, HR, and nursing. And I stood up in front of all 150 senior vice presidents and I shared my story. Now I went a little bit deeper into my story because we had a little bit more time, but 13 senior vice presidents approached me over the course of that 2-day conference and said, "You were speaking directly to me, Kim, when you were talking about feeling full of shame, feeling isolated, unable to control your thoughts, your drinking. You spoke to me." And again, that's when I said, we all need to know that it's okay to not be okay, but especially leaders, because leaders set the tone of what an organization looks like and how they support the mental health and well-being of their employees. So on the bottom of the screen here, there's a little chart that really kind of shows you the process of when we share our lived experience, we start to normalize mental health. When we normalize mental health, we create that safe environment, which fosters open dialogue, which increases the ability for that employee to be referred to treatment. And then you have a healthier and a more engaged employee. 8 in 10 people feel that shame, stigma, and fear ramifications are reasons why they don't disclose living with a mental illness. That's a lot of people. So I want to talk a little bit about why people are afraid to disclose that they're living with a mental health condition, and it's stigma, which is defined as the general endorsement of stereotypes and prejudices that result in discrimination against people living with a mental health challenge. Self-stigma is the next level. It's an internalization of public stigma. Self-stigma is what caused me to be silent in the workplace and with my family. My family didn't even know that I was suffering with all these things. I literally was a silent soldier in my own head and in my own mind, suffering in silence, because before I got sober, I was, again, called myself an alcoholic. I don't use that word anymore, but I even stigmatized myself throughout my sober journey because I was embarrassed. What that could potentially lead to is a concept called label avoidance, which is choosing not to seek mental health or substance misuse treatment to avoid being assigned a stigmatizing label. So think about it. 1 in 5 people in your organization could potentially be living with a mental health condition not disclosed. 8 in 10 of them could be afraid of that to speak openly because they fear shame and stigma. How many of them are experiencing label avoidance because they're too afraid to say that they need help? And if they're not getting the help that they need, how is that impacting themselves personally, the patient care and the patient experience? How is it affecting turnover, absenteeism, presenteeism? We must get a hold of really changing the culture about how we talk about mental health in the workplace, which leads me to the power of words. And this, I think, is one of the most important areas, I think, of talking about mental health and well-being, because words can empower, they can humanize, they can motivate, and then they can unite, but they can also disempower, objectify, wound, and shame. So on this screen here, I'm going to go through the power of language. Words absolutely matter. And when it comes to changing the perception of mental health, we must embrace inclusive, non-stigmatizing, non-discriminatory, person-centered language. So I'm going to go through a potential conversation on a Monday morning around the water cooler when we were all in the office. This is just a hypothetical conversation. I'm not saying that any of these words would ever be used in your workplaces, but this is just to make a point. So there's 5 of us around the water cooler because we know that 1 in 5 could be experiencing a mental health condition. I'm one of those 1 in 5, and I have a horrible hangover. And in that discussion, one of my coworkers is talking about our other coworker, John Doe, who's a crazy nut psychoalcoholic who went on a bender this weekend, and he drank himself silly, and he's just psycho. He went off the wagon and he checked himself into the loony bin. And you know what? I had no idea that he was an alcoholic and had those problems. And you know what? If he comes back to this job, I don't even know if I want to associate myself with him. I'm in that conversation and I'm already feeling shame, fear, and stigma all over me. I would never in a million years step forward during that particular conversation and say that I am just like John Doe. However, if we shift that conversation and we say, wow, I had no idea that our coworker John was living with alcohol misuse. And I had no idea that he had been struggling for such a long time and that he felt so much shame in speaking openly about it. And I see him as a person, and I am so incredibly proud of him that he saw the signs and that he was brave enough to finally take action, check into the hospital and follow his doctor's orders and find his way back to recovery. And you know what? When he comes back to our office, when he comes back and he's in recovery, I'm going to support him. I'm going to be there for him. And I'm going to remind him every day that he's a person first. And what he did was amazing and brave. Now, if I were in that conversation, I would probably say, you know what, guys? I'm just like John, and I have a problem too. So I no longer call myself an alcoholic, because to me, that word is on the list of discriminatory language. And so are the words addict, nuts, junkie, schizophrenic, crazy, nuts, psycho. I now refer to myself as a person who lives with alcohol misuse. I am a person who lives with suicidal thoughts. If I lived with schizophrenia, I would not be a schizophrenic. I am a person who lives with schizophrenia. I am a person with the lived experience. By shifting over to that person-centered language, we remove the stigma that is associated with the illness that they are living with. And we replace that stigma with empathy and showing that person that they are safe, seen, heard, and understood. Because I can tell you, with all of the conversations that I have in the work that I do, I create a completely non-judgmental space for anyone who I have any conversation with. That matters. Because when people feel safe, seen, heard, and understood, they feel like they can open up and have that conversation. So what is our role as a leader? We need to recognize that employee mental health is a top priority. We need to embed the leadership commitment to mental health and well-being in all communication. I'm working with the commissioner of the Department of Safety in one of the New England states up here, who is he's amazing. He just created the Office of Wellness and Resiliency within his organization. He's got 1,700 people within his organization, including state troopers, fire, EMS, the fire marshal, DMV 911. And he recognizes that wellness and resiliency is a top priority. So he's created this division within his organization. And I consulted with him on what some of the verbiage should be in terms of wellness and resiliency. And I said, you know, we need to be able to create safe workplace cultures where people are not afraid to speak openly, that there's no fear of retribution, judgment, or job loss. And that's exactly what he's doing up there. We need to commit to leadership training on mental health stigma and inclusive language. I'm going up to that Department of Safety this coming Monday to train 20 of his senior leaders on the 4 pillars of creating and sustaining a mentally healthy workplace culture. We need to shift to person-centered language and then create that culture where everyone feels safe speaking openly about mental health. And I'll share with you one example of how true leadership can save a life. In my bio, I always recognize that the nurse practitioner who saw me on July 16th, 2009 saved my life, because he saw me as a person the day that I went in to seek help. He said, I see you and you've got 3 things that are going on and I can help you. But I also credit being here to my leader, because in 2016, and this is part of the role of leadership, I was her top performing person on her team. Yet she had noticed that I had pulled back just slightly. I wasn't as engaged. I was missing deadlines here or there. There were just some slight things that were going on with me. So she said, Kim, I'm going to come visit you. She lived in Newark, New Jersey, and hopped on a plane. And at that time, she flew up to Boston where I was, and we spent the day together. We did one sales call that day, but the rest of the day was just the 2 of us. And she said, Kim, what is going on with you? She created a safe cocoon for me to say, I'm not okay. I may look like I have a suit of armor on and I can do anything, but I can't. I am 7 years sober. I am experiencing extreme depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts, but I'm holding it all together. We cried that day. We laughed that day. We hugged that day. She saw me that day and she said, Kim, I want you to take extra time off around Memorial Day weekend this year. She gave me 2 extra days off, and I decided to just drive my little car 6 hours up to Rhinebeck, New York. And I spent the weekend with a woman who changed my life by the name of Byron Katie. She has this process called the work, where it really helped me understand my thoughts and unwind them all. Her work saved my life too, but more importantly, the fact that that leader remotely from a remote area saw that I was just a little bit off and said, I need to figure out what's going on. She saved my life because by giving me that time off, I went to that weekend retreat with Byron Katie, and that is when my light finally started to come back on. That leader created a safe place for me to say I'm not okay. And that leader is one of the reasons why I am still here. Now, the 4 pillars of creating and sustaining a mentally healthy workplace culture, we just kind of sort of went through them a little bit. It's recognize the impact of mental health in the workplace. Share that lived experience to bring the human connection to mental health. Change the perception of mental health in the workplace. Decrease stigma. Change the language that we're using. And then create that culture of safety within an organization where everyone feels safe. Speaking openly and saying, I'm not okay. Now, I've actually created a place where everyone on this conference can go to. You can go directly up to the NursesBond website, or actually to my website. It's kimlamontagne.net/NursesBond. We have a partnership with NursesBond that offers benefits to NursesBond members. There's free mental health resources that are available up there. The power of words, stigma in the workplace, language, words matter. Oh, my sharing was just paused, it looks like. Can you still see my screen? Okay, I just got a note that says, can you see my, are you seeing my Zoom or are you seeing my presentation?
We're seeing your next step. You're good.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Okay. I can't see them. It disappeared on me. So, but anyway, the next step is you can go directly up to to kimlamontagne.net, NursesBond. I have free downloadable resources that are available up there. There's information up there on the 4 pillars. I'd love to have conversations with each and every one of you about, what are the challenges that you're experiencing in terms of recognizing, identifying the people within your organization who may be struggling, preparing your leaders and letting your leaders know that it's not their job to be counselors. When I teach and train leaders, I don't train them to be counselors. I train them to give them the skills and the confidence that they need to be able to identify someone who may be experiencing distress, to be able to have the confidence that they can open up the conversation and say, are you okay? And truly listen to that employee. And maybe even follow it up with on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you today? And if you're a 6, how can you get to a 7? Not how can you get to a 10, but how can you get to a 7? Because we want to celebrate every small victory. We want to also teach our leaders to be able to change the conversations, change the dialogue and the words that we use to help decrease that stigma. Because there's a lot of folks within our organizations who are suffering behind a mask, who are afraid to ask for help. And I just last 2 weeks ago was a presenter for a company called the HR Collaborative, and they have monthly events called the Collaborative Cafe. We focused on mental health last month. And several leaders in all of the follow-up questions, several leaders, their main concern was that they're still afraid to talk about mental health. They're afraid of what's going to happen when they open up that conversation. They are afraid of the unknown. They are afraid because they don't feel 100% prepared. I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't open the conversation about mental health and well-being. Because as a leader, if you can identify someone who's in distress, truly open that dialogue and empathize with them, again, your role is not to be a counselor, but your role is to say, I see you. I don't fully understand what you're going through, but I support you and I'm here for you. And I'm going to crosswalk you to the services that you need, that I know that we have, because I'm a leader here and my role is to crosswalk you to those services and help you get better and return. If you go out to work, if you have to leave work, I want you to come back as a better and a more engaged employee. It's about creating safe workplace cultures where everyone feels safe speaking openly. And if you are a leader and you share your own story, you'll be amazed at how many other people will come out of the woodwork. Because once one person opens up the dialogue, and many people hear that, wow, well, my leader, my goodness, my leader has a suit of armor on every day. My leader, maybe I never expected my leader to have a problem. But if my leader has a problem, that means that it's okay that I have a problem, and maybe we can all talk about it. Lives depend on open conversations about mental health and well-being in the workplace, and leaders must be prepared to have those conversations. And I hope that sharing my own story has been helpful for this group here. And if you yourself see pieces of yourself in my story, that's okay. No judgment. None of us are perfect. But sometimes we just need to hear from others that what we're going through is the same as what many others are going through, and that it's okay to not be okay. And it is absolutely 100% okay to ask for help. Because if people don't ask for help and we don't know that they're suffering, we can't accommodate them. If we can't accommodate them, their employee engagement is going to be decreasing on a regular basis. But if people step forward and we see them and we accommodate them, we can help them get better, get healthier, be more engaged, have better coworker interactions, better client service, better customer care, better patient care. It's a win-win for all of us. So with that, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for listening to this today. I would love for you to reach out to me at any time. You again go directly up to my website, go to kimlamontagne.net/NursesBond, search the free resources, schedule a consult, send me an email. All of my information is up there. And I would love for you to all connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I hope that that's been very helpful for you today.
Wow. Kim, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. And secondly, for your willingness to be so vulnerable in this industry, and to obviously the folks here that have joined us this weekend. Absolutely incredible. As I said before you got started, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. As a chief safety officer and executive of a health system in Southern California, we know this is in our world today, not just in healthcare, but in our communities. And in parallel, to add on, folks, it is not just the nurses. It's not your support services division folks or the contract service. I just recently spoke with Dr. Shibuna maybe a few weeks back. I had a CEO who's been in healthcare for a little over 18 years and contacted me because he was basically at that point of suicide. And to be able to, I haven't talked to the man in maybe 4 or 5 years. We hadn't been in connection, but he just had this safe place and understood that my background could allow him some avenues to maybe have a second chance. But he resigned from his position, and I'm so grateful that he made that phone call, because he's now getting treatment and he's taking care of himself, and hopefully he can get his family and the rest of his life back together and back on track and bring his expertise back to what makes him happy in his life. So Kim, thank you so much. We truly appreciate you. This is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. And that CEO made a bold move, and he's going to change lives because he made a statement and he committed to himself. And many leaders who are at the top, they're alone.
Yes,
And
that was his
afraid to
feeling.
take that mask. Yes.
Yeah,
And
that was his feeling.
there is zero shame. I don't care if you are entry level, mid-level, senior, or at the top. You are a human being, and it is okay to say that you're not okay.
Absolutely. You're fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and joining us. With that said, I'll pass this back on to Dr. Shiba.